Welcome to the Monsters, Madness, and Magic podcast. I am Justin, joined as usual by my co-hosts Daniel, Angelique, and Henry. And this evening we are honored to host a very special guest, horror historian and author, critic, man of many hats, David J. Skal. David, how are you tonight, sir?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, and I'm sure we're all going to pick your brain, but you've got a new book that just dropped on September 1st, Fright Favorites, 31 Movies to Haunt Your Halloween and Beyond. Can you tell us about the book, some of the films that appear, and your reasoning behind your choices?
Well, it's a book from Turner Classic Movies, who approached me last year. They've been doing holiday-themed movie books with Running Press in Philadelphia. And they called me up and described the project, and I said, that really sounds interesting. And we started working on it about in January, and here it is, published. It's been a lot of fun. It's a kind of a countdown book. It's 31 films, one pick for every day of the month of Halloween, and some also runs as well. So really, we're dealing with 62 films, not 31. But I had a lot of fun with it because I got to use a lot of research that I didn't have room for in a lot of my other books, which usually, deal with very broadly, with the history of horror films. And there's only so much you can say about an individual film. So here I had a little more latitude. They basically liked my choices. I accommodated some of their choices too, which is just fine. Everybody at Turner and Running Press are movie fans as well. And as soon as we decided, okay, this is not going to be, a definitive encyclopedia of films, but it's kind of an entry point, especially for people who don't know too much about the genre. And I hope there's enough in the way of new anecdotes and photos you've never seen, or prints of photos that are better than you've ever seen before. And it's been getting a really nice response, and seems to be hitting exactly the kind of the mix of diehard fans and people who don't know too much about the genre but want to know more.
Right. So what are some of your Halloween traditions? What films are on your rotation yearly? Do you like to mix it up, or?
Well, this year is very different because usually at Halloween, people ask me, what are you going to be for Halloween this year? And I say, I'm going to be the most terrifying monster of them all, a talk show guest. And that has not really happened, although podcasts have really stepped in to fill the void. No, usually I'm traveling. I'm almost always tied up with something on Halloween itself. So I haven't thrown a Halloween party of my own in nearly 20 years. Terrifying to think.
Oh, look at this.
We're all getting older. But I grew up with Halloween. I was, among the first generation that really learned how to do it after World War II. It was the 50s where Halloween really made its mark on the map. And after the war, sugar rationing ended, and the candy companies got into it. The term trick or treat really wasn't that used very much at all. It doesn't appear in print anywhere in America until the year 1940. And then there was this big hiatus with the war, but Halloween's fortunes as a big commercial holiday got underway in the 50s. Disney got into the act with a cartoon called Trick or Treat, in which Donald Duck's nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, all learned how to trick or treat, and a real witch got involved, and there was a snappy little song with it. So all these people moving out to the suburbs in the 50s and had no social rituals of their own. It was a kind of a strange new wasteland. Picked up on Halloween, and it has been nothing but growth ever since. It's now the second biggest holiday after Christmas. And if it was a gift-giving holiday, it would be even more. But as I tell people with my book, Tim Burton's already showed us that Halloween is just an excuse for Christmas. So even after Halloween, there may be somebody on your gift list who might have fun with it.
You said yourself, now this is a very true and very cool statement, that you write books that you couldn't find and that no one else has written. And I got one of my favorites here, Vampires Encounters with the Undead, sitting next to me. And you've got everything in here. You got historical accounts to vampire short stories. So is the vampire the creature of the night that lured you into the dark? Did you get bitten? Is that the one that bit you?
Yeah, really. And I've wondered why that happened. I think I've got an answer. I was part of this generation of kids. We call ourselves monster kids, and still do. And in the late 50s and early 60s, when the Universal films were being released to television for the first time, they were accompanied by fan clubs and the monster magazines, of course, Famous Monsters of Filmland and Castle of Frankenstein. And we all picked our own monsters, our favorite monsters, it seems. And most monsters are really out of control. And that certainly resonates with a lot of adolescent emotions and hormones and all that sort of thing. But Dracula was different. He was in control under all circumstances. And even though monsters didn't frighten me, the Cold War did. And I was surprised when I did research for my book, The Monster Show. I went back and looked at the newspapers and saw what was happening. I knew the month that I latched onto monster magazines and the Aurora model kits for the first time. And it was October of 1962. And like I said, monsters were old pals. I'd totally forgotten that I was terrified out of my mind about being potentially blown off the face of the earth by an atomic bomb lobbed over from Cuba. And I was really stunned to see that the #1 pop song on the charts during the Cuban Missile Crisis was Monster Mash by Boris Bobby Pickett, a dance of death sung by a mad scientist. What else could be? And this was really kind of a revelation and led to me exploring how big traumas and anxieties in the culture inevitably set in motion recognizable patterns in scary entertainment. And that's how that book came about. And I didn't realize that 30 years later, I was still going to be doing these kinds of books. I thought it was really kind of a one-off, but monsters have been very good to me in my middle and old age, I guess.
What's your favorite depiction of Dracula? What's your favorite vampire? Because they don't all have to be Dracula.
My favorite vampire is Dracula. And in terms of, I guess my favorite Dracula film doesn't exist because it would be cobbled together. Maybe somebody, I don't have the energy to do this, but somebody who's handy with video editing might want to give it a try. Just cobble together a master version of Dracula from all the various film versions that adhere to the basic plot, and just scene by scene, dialogue by dialogue, just cut them all together and bounce them back and forth like ping pong. I think it would be a lot of fun. They're all so different. Mm-hmm. Dracula exists in his transformations. There isn't. He comes out of folklore, out of the mm-hmm. oral tradition of folklore. Bram Stoker put him in written form for a brief bit, only a few decades, and then the visual, the moving image took over, which is very, very similar to the oral tradition, in that everyone who retells the story adds something of their own, has their own take on it. And so I stopped complaining about Bram Stoker not getting his due and people, messing with his text. the whole point is to mess with the text, and that's how Dracula stays alive and immortal, by changing with the times and changing with each telling.
I happen to my favorite vampire book is Lord of the Dead by Tom Holland, and he's a of all the things you could grow up to be. What do you want to be? I want to be a Byron scholar, but apparently that's what he is a Byron scholar. And so he, as you said, you know, take the myth and reshape it and retell it. So while Lord of the Dead isn't a Dracula story, it is telling Lord Byron, interweaving it fact with a little bit of fiction as if he were a vampire. And it's all because it's Byron with Polidori. It even deals with the night with Mary Shelley and Shiloh. And it actually mentions that evening, but the way that book is written is just brilliant. I was, again, I mean, you've written so much about vampires. I was just curious.
Yeah. No, Lord Byron has everything to do with the modern image of the vampire. And it was because of his physician and traveling companion, John Polidori, wrote this story called The Vampire, in which this strange nobleman who was fatal to a series of women whose name was Lord Ruthven, spelled Ruthven. Nobody pronounces it correctly. It's actually Ruthven. And
thank you.
The world assumed that Byron was, you know, the real deal, and this was kind of a Romano clay, and people even thought that Byron himself had written it as a kind of a confessional thing, and he didn't. But from its first appearance in literature, the vampire departed from the vampire of Eastern European folklore, which was more or less like a zombie, you know, just a ravenous walking corpse, usually a family member, usually from the peasant class. There were no aristocratic folkloric vampires. But Byron made quite a splash, and the story, The Vampire, was adapted for the stage. It was made into a very, very popular opera that was part of the standard repertory all through the 19th century. And Bram Stoker turned his back on all that when he came to write Dracula. He went in a different direction. He was kind of interested in all the anxieties that were being stirred up by modern science and Darwinism in particular. And so his vampire was an aristocrat. He kind of threw that sop to Byron and company. But he was not a seducer. He was a hideous old man who got younger as he drank blood, but he never became attractive. And but it was only with the theater in the 20th century and with movies that producers and the public, I guess, just insisted on that old aristocratic romantic vampire be resurrected. So what we have today is this strange version of Dracula that Stoker himself would have trouble recognizing, but the public knows and recognizes all too well. People who've never even seen, the movie Dracula with Lugosi, nonetheless know exactly how to do an imitation of Lugosi, and there's probably nobody who puts such a mark on the character.
Certainly.
We can argue about whether Lugosi was a romantic vampire or not. I taught a course based on the Monster Show several years ago, and I had an almost all female class. And I asked the women, I said, okay, you've seen Lugosi for the first time. Notice that my students were too young to have even seen the Coppola Dracula the first time it came around.
Hey.
Want to really feel old?
Damn.
Well, join me here. And I said, well, tell me what this legendary sex appeal that Lugosi was supposed to have, what do you think? And to a woman, they all just said, ew, no. They found Christopher Lee sexy. They found Frank Langella especially sexy. And
Yeah.
Langella really.
That's
Len-
that's not no.
Langella does. You like Lugosi.
I like Lugosi and Gary Oldman.
Can you pinpoint his specific?
The eyes. Those eyes.
His eyes are.
Mm.
Those are sexy eyes.
Yeah.
No, tell me.
Yeah, no, it's his eyes and he's just got where he's so still when he's just,
Well, he is. He's
okay, yeah.
He was great. I mean, I talked to somebody who worked on stage with him in Dracula, and he one of the frequent things he did was just to remain absolutely still, and he would stare, and he barely blinked, and then suddenly he would let one eyebrow go up, and that would be the it was very restrained. We think of him as over the top, but in reality, he didn't have to do that much to be very effective. And both, he and Karloff as Lugosi as Dracula and Karloff as Frankenstein, at the cusp of the talkies, the end of the silent era, the beginning of talking pictures, they had their feet in both worlds. They are both largely pantomime performances. Lugosi's got that voice, but he doesn't have that much dialogue. And the most memorable scenes are again those shots of him just standing and staring, or the very first time you see him in the crypt, and the camera is pulling you toward him as if by hypnotic force. And Dracula was in fact released a silent version with titles instead of dialogue. So I think it's a reason those two characterizations stick in our minds, is because they are primarily visual. They are images that we remember as much as something that we hear. And of course, with Karloff, we didn't hear him at all. But they're both. That's, I think, a reason they're both just as iconic representations of silent film as Chaplin's The Little Tramp.
It's also good to be the first. Sorry, Henry, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I didn't want to cut off.
And they're so well known; they are just burned into the worlds of communication and advertising, and you don't have to know anything about movies to know who these creatures are. And but us monster kids were there first. The world has caught up with us. We knew they were important way back when.
So David, did you ever get it was something interesting. I had an old film professor that we went through all of the original, like the Bela Lugosi Dracula and all of the other monster movies. And I remember him telling me, if you really enjoyed Dracula, you have to watch the Spanish version. And have you ever seen the one that was made on the same set with the Bela Lugosi?
Yeah, I'm the one who went to Cuba and dug up the missing reel, so it was able to be restored.
Wow.
I was pounding the drum. I was beating a drum for that for a long time, and for a while it seemed like Universal wasn't going to do it, even after they had the missing footage in hand. The rest of the film, the original negative, the camera negative, was in perfect condition, but the transitional reel from Transylvania to England, where the main characters were introduced, had turned to gunk. But the Cinemateca de Cuba had a complete show print. It was a little battered, but they were still using it. It was a safety print, probably made in the 1950s. And I contacted them. They invited me down. I got a visa from the State Department, who controls how Americans can spend money going to Cuba. And I spent 3 days down there having fun with it. And they projected it several times and let me set up my camera to do frame blow-ups. And it was really a revelation. It was in the early days of talkies, the novelty and excitement about talking films was to be able to hear actors speak in their natural voices. Dubbing, to the extent it was done, was considered cheating. You know, you really wanted to hear the actors say their own words. And so for a few years, the studios, which made a ton of money, half their revenue was coming from overseas. And in the silent days, all they had to do were change the intertitles. But here it was a little more complicated. So there was a brief period, didn't last too many years, but Universal's Spanish language version of Dracula was probably one of the most ambitious one of these productions. Some were done, most were in Spanish, some were done in French and German as well, but most of them were Spanish because that was the largest overseas market with so many countries speaking the Spanish language. And so it got Hollywood over the hump during a very difficult time. 1931 was the worst year of the Great Depression. And so they needed to maintain every revenue stream they could. They couldn't just write off the foreign market. And the producer of the Spanish version was, his name was Paul Kohner, and he was assumed to be the heir apparent to Universal. He was Carl Laemmle Sr.'s protege, and everybody assumed he would simply take over the reins of the studio when Uncle Carl was going to retire. But Laemmle surprised everybody by choosing his son, his 21-year-old son, Julius, who he gave the reins of the studio as a birthday present. Junior Laemmle adopted the name Carl Laemmle Jr. And as a result, Kohner wasn't that happy about it because he wanted to do Dracula. He originally wanted to use Conrad Veidt, which is a really interesting idea. Kohner was, he was from Austria, he was from Czechoslovakia, and later became a agent for most of the European talent in Hollywood. He represented everybody. He represented Veidt for a while, and Greta Garbo, and so many others. And he felt really stung. And so his version of Dracula was going to upstage the American version. And he did this, I think he did upstage it to a fair degree, mostly because he and his crew were able to watch the rushes every day. And they worked on the same sets at night, all night long. And Kohner had another major reason he wanted to do the film. He had fallen in love with the Spanish ingenue actress Lupita Tovar, who he had already produced a vehicle for her called The Cat Creeps, based on the old Universal film and the stage play The Cat and the Canary.
Oh, yes.
And he'd fallen in love with her, and she was ready to call it quits and go back to Mexico, because she didn't really see any future in English-speaking Hollywood from 1931 on. And he used Dracula to keep her there long enough to propose to her, and they had one of the longest and happiest marriages in Hollywood history. I met her in her 90s. She held on until the age of 106. Just an amazing lady. And I was just so happy. I met a lot of these people when these movies were at the very limits of living human memory. And there were so many people who never gave oral histories or even interviews. Even major figures like Todd Browning, one of the biggest names in horror history. He never gave a retrospective interview. And he was really, he didn't like to talk about his career. He had a lot of grudges, and he was kind of bitter. Even that would have been interesting to hear about directly from him. Kohner was going to give an interview about the Spanish Dracula and about Todd Browning. And it was going to be for American Cinematographer magazine. this is the year before I started working on Hollywood Gothic, and unfortunately, Conan had a stroke, and he died a few weeks before that interview was going to take place. And but later in the year, I did contact Lupita, and we enjoyed contact for many years afterwards. And it was always delightful to see her going to the fan conventions and appearing on television, and just it's like getting into a time machine with some of these folks I got to know.
You know, it is interesting you brought, you know, it is kind of a bittersweet. I mean, the fact that especially with the Spanish version of Dracula, it's, you know, it was considered lost for so long. And the first time I saw it, I just thought how amazing the atmosphere of the film was. Even compared to, you know, the Bela Lugosi Dracula, I just felt in some ways just the pacing and the atmosphere, and even the acting was just, it had another otherworldly quality to it that I thought the Lugosi, I mean, it still had, but it really is a shame that it was, you know, it took so long for it to finally be unearthed and brought back to cinema. And I do think that it's great that we were able to recapture some of that, but, you know, a lot of the actors involved in it, you know, really could, you know, they really, I think had that film been out in the public eye without being lost for so long, those actors would have gotten a lot of recognition for the talent that they had at that time, especially in that film.
Not all of them, you know, enjoyed making these films. Another one of the Dracula cast I got to know was David Manners, and he really resented the film. He thought it was a terrible movie while he was making it. He insisted he never watched the film. I'm not sure I believe him on that, but people were constantly sending him videotapes and going so far as to, somebody impersonated Bela Lugosi Jr. to get a meeting with him at his retirement community he lived in Santa Barbara, and under the pretext that he wanted to learn more about his father, and Manners just said, "Well, I thought your father was kind of a ridiculous person." He walked up and down the soundstage, looking into a mirror, throwing his cape over his shoulder, and saying, "I am Dracula."
Yes.
And and after a while, he'd just throw some of these people out. There was somebody he just said, "You're not interested in me at all. I'm just a surrogate for Bela Lugosi, as far as you're concerned." And I, you know, he was right. David was really a very interesting man. He was a Broadway actor. He was a novelist. Very, very interested in Eastern philosophies and religions, and you could talk to him about all kinds of terrific things. Dracula was just kind of a sticking point. The most interesting thing he told me, though, was that people would ask him who directed Dracula, and he would say, "Well, I don't really know, because Todd Browning was just a figure back in the shadows somewhere. All of my scenes in the film were directed by Karl Freund, the cameraman." And that was kind of a revelation. Browning did not make an easy transition to talkies. You can see this in his first talkie over at MGM, which had Lugosi in it. He may have been screen testing him even at that early date. But it's full of silences, and the pacing is terrible. In the silent era, Browning could interact with you. I mean, he would just keep up a steady stream of instructions to the actors. He would have musicians on set. He was involved in all aspects of film, writing the story, writing the titles, being involved in the editing. And with talkies, the various crafts and disciplines became segregated. and unionized finally. And Browning just had to kind of say action and cut, and that was about it. And but we're probably never going to hear the complete story about what happened on the set of Dracula. Paul Kohner could have told us, and sadly, came within 2 weeks of telling us. I asked Lupita, could you give us any hints about what was going on? And she said, well, of course, I met all these people and watched them, and we were introduced to Browning and the American cast, but my English was non-existent at that point. She was a polyglot. She could speak 5 languages fluently, by the end of her life, which is really amazing. But back then, she had no idea of what people were talking about. And they tended just to smile at her. She was very pretty. And so she had a favorable of almost everybody. And what was going on? Browning was supposed to direct 5 pictures for Universal. And it's my strong suspicion that they got him believing they were going to get Lon Chaney along with him. Laemmle Sr. gave the go-ahead to Dracula with the proviso that only Chaney would play Dracula, because it was considered a very risky film. There had been no real supernatural monsters on the American screen. There were scary characters, often played by Chaney in the silent days, but they were always human. They were always revealed to be human, or part of a plot to embezzle a fortune, or steal an inheritance or something. And this was different, and all the studios were nervous about doing it. They knew it had been very successful on stage, but would it make money? Would the public buy it? And they did. It was a major hit. Dracula and Frankenstein are probably responsible for saving Universal from insolvency. All the studios were teetering on the edge. It was a very risky time, 1931. And I think the fact that it was such a fear-filled year had something to do with so many of our classic horror icons taking root that year. The films were produced or released: Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Todd Browning's Freaks. And you can find within these characters kind of the building blocks of everything else that came later in scary entertainment.
Now with that,
go ahead.
Sorry. With that being said, the 30s, 31 being the Great Depression, all of these fantastic horror films coming out that, took everybody's mind off of what was going on, and saving the studios. Do you see something like that happening right now to save the theaters? Do you see any new monsters on the horizon?
I don't know. I think we're going to probably see more paranoid forms of horror. The intruding outsider. We've seen this sort of thing building, ever since 9/11. What's going to happen to movies? I'm not sure. It is a very scary time. And before I forget, let me comment on your tattoo, because it reminds me of the Cuban Missile Crisis days. It's a fallout shelter sign, isn't it?
Yes, it's a radiation symbol.
Am I correct? Okay.
Yes.
There I am. Okay. The fallout shelter really kind of took the place of Dracula's crypt for a while, I think, when I was a kid. But what's going to happen to my whole professional background before I started writing about film was in the theater, and it's been a big part of my life for the last 40 years or so, and it's in danger of actually becoming extinct. It's really frightening, and I hope we're going to see some new developments, new kinds of theater, perhaps multimedia experiments of the kind we haven't seen before. But I do. I got a T-shirt from a West End theatrical charity that just says "The show must go on," and I need to wear that on screen. And the monster show must go on as well, no matter what happens.
Will. I have to tell you, it will. The theater thing. I feel like it will. It's been doing this for a long time. Video games have been people. I'm 40, so I've been saying this for 20 years now. Say just the way the games have gotten cinematic is that I was even saying, a decade or so ago, and I quit going to the theater. I don't care why. I can pay $30 for a movie and a bucket of popcorn, $50 total a night, or I can go and pay $50 and buy Morrowind and get 300 hours of entertainment and never have to worry about it. But and I just say that to say things are evolving. Because of this, what we've seen going on, like your background in theater, I have hope for it. You said things are going to change and morph and evolve, and it's doing that. The show must go on. I think you're right. It's just not going to be, it's certainly not going to be what people think it's going to be, but it will carry on. It will be carried on either through patrons, and it'll be underground. Just the way it's always been. It'll be underground, and it'll be.
Well, I think we'll be seeing a two-tiered kind of theater where people will have to spend top dollar to be in very small, spaced out audiences in, live auditoriums, and the rest of us are going to watch things streaming.
Yeah.
Get used to everything. I'd rather be on the road, actually meeting people in bookstores and at colleges. But it looks like Zoom is going to be a major part of the way I talk to my public from now on. Monsters, though, I think will persist in the movies, though, because over the years they've just become more and more central. They used to be, these kinds of movies used to be the B pictures, the C pictures, the D pictures, and you couldn't even find titles like Dracula or Frankenstein or directors' names like James Whale and Todd Browning in cinema history books when I was a kid. That's one of the reasons I wanted to write about these people. I couldn't find anything about them to read. But this, those early horror films just brought out this dormant impulse toward the fantastic and the frightening and the wondrous and impossible, and that had been part of the European cinema at the very beginning, but had a delayed progression in America. Now, if you look at the biggest grossing movies of all time, they tend to be summer blockbusters with some aspect of science fiction or horror or the fantastic or incredible creature effects. This is central now to what the cinema has become. So I don't think it will be dropped. I think we'll probably be seeing a lot more animated films if live production continues to be difficult. It's amazing how much of the cultural space that used to be occupied by Broadway musicals is now occupied by animated musical films. Most of them from Disney, and it's a very natural medium. There have not been too many animated horror films, but I don't see why there shouldn't be.
Great.
Agreed. Do you have a favorite modern horror film in the last decade or so?
Oh boy, there are so many subgenres that you can almost have to say, okay, of this subgenre, what is your favorite? But I was very taken with Hereditary last year. I thought it was kind of extraordinary in that horror movies like detective fiction, they're usually all about death, but nobody has to deal with death on an emotional level or a personal level. Nobody ever mourns. Maybe there's somebody who wears a veil to a funeral, and then it's on with the gumshoe story, or the, but death doesn't have much of an impact. Hereditary just kind of threw all that out the window, and it was just a harrowing depiction of grief and loss on an American family. And Toni Collette really, she was nominated. She really deserved an Oscar, I think, for that role. It's the kind of film you don't want to talk about too much. You just want to tell people to go see it, because there are some major spoilers that could too easily be revealed to you. But it kind of said, wow, horror movies can be about real things as well as the supernatural. I mean, it was a very ambitious film. It was kind of trying to be like the Long Day's Journey into Night of the horror genre or something, and had a terrific cast, absolutely wonderful ensemble cast. And I've recommended it. Not everybody has appreciated my recommending it after they experienced it, because it is quite a roller coaster. And, but it certainly pushed back the definitions and the parameters of what a scary movie can be like.
Do you have any? What's your favorite horror fiction? I mean, obviously, I can assume that you were a fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula, but what else are you a fan of? Did you get into any of the pulp writers of
Well,
that
I guess
era?
I was a very precocious reader, and I was reading on the college level almost by the time I was in the 6th grade or something like that. So I was reading all kinds of stuff I probably shouldn't have. It was in the 6th grade that I read Psycho by Robert Bloch, and I read it the day before I saw the movie, which probably was not the greatest thing to do. So I am not one of those people who will ever have the experience of having Hitchcock's Psycho wash over me without a clue as to what was going to happen. But I loved, after that, I looked for everything Robert Bloch wrote, all of his pulp stories and his novels. Ray Bradbury was a big influence. Harlan Ellison, who was also, a borderline, he was a science fiction writer, but he was very well respected in the horror genre as well, was another one of my idols, and he later became a personal, a teacher and mentor to me, which was kind of amazing. And I didn't make I wrote science fiction novels for a while, and I didn't make much of a distinction when I was growing up between the genres. It was all kind of fantastic storytelling. When I interviewed Forrest Ackerman for one of my books, and he said that he had consulted back in the 50s with the Los Angeles Public Library, and they didn't know how to organize and catalog all of their what was science fiction, what was horror, what was this or that, and he recommended that they simply start a section called Improbabilia. And I don't know if they took him up on it, but I thought that was fairly apt. If it was imaginative and exciting, I was there for it. I inhaled books, I inhaled movies, I inhaled television. It was all just this wonderful continuum, and pretty much still that way, even at my advanced state of life.
Well, David, I think we've kept you long enough. If no one has anything left for Mr. Skal.
I had a couple, actually. All right, so we've asked you before in the
yes,
like where you see the horror monsters coming. I've probably already tipped my hand that I'm a video gamer and stuff, but one of my favorite franchises is Metal Gear. And in this series, there is a recurring theme of the use of nanomachines and nanotechnology. Well, Michael Crichton, or Crichton, however the hell you pronounce it, wrote a book called Prey. I think it was a couple of decades ago. Yes, sir?
You were asking about his name? It is Crichton, yes.
Okay. Crichton wrote a book called Prey that also dealt with nanotechnology, nanobots. Shit, that might have been a spoiler. So sorry, anybody who heard that. But all right. In the light of the fact that H.P. Lovecraft has now entered the public domain, which isn't that coincidental that we now see Hollywood coming out with all these Lovecraft films because it's in public domain and they don't have to pay any, regardless. With Lovecraft being in public domain and all of his, the horrors beyond description, for lack of a better term, we call them Lovecraftian, just, the unknown, unseeable horrors. And in light of current situation going on, do you see that as the coming trend for like how horror monsters evolved is the unseen?
Yeah, it's kind of, I'm fascinated with Lovecraft Country because I do a pretty good job of not showing you too much. And you're kind of always completing the hideous image in your own mind. And that's why horror has always been a great, it's been great for radio drama or just telling stories around the campfire, because the thing in the back of your head that scares the hell out of you is not necessarily what scares somebody else. So it's a very personal thing. And so
seeing this, Angelique, I'm sorry to interrupt,
dealing
sir.
with stories about
I'm sorry.
When you're dealing with unseen horrors, it's a very, very fertile ground because it's very participatory. You are making the story happen as much as the storyteller is making it happen. You're completing the thing, in the back of your head.
In some ways, though, it seems that, especially in film, writers have to be skilled at their craft to kind of pull that off effectively. I think that so many movies seem like they want to show you you see the monster coming in full force. But one of my favorite movies of all time, Alien, that whole 90% of that movie is getting a glimpse of what's stalking the crew the whole entire time. There's this horror to it that, when you finally see it at the end, I mean, certainly it lives up to the terror of it, but just the whole entire time you're on the edge of your seat because, you have a glimpse of this monster in your mind's building this creation. And I think as audiences, we've been spoon-fed everything. It feels like for a lot of horror in the last decade or two, and then for horror films that actually take the time to almost force you to participate in imagining what that is. I think that's what made movies even like Hereditary stand out, because you have to follow along with the plot and all these things start getting kind of peppered in and you're slowly pulled into the plot. I think that's what partially makes that movie so effective outside of the other things you mentioned earlier.
Radio drama. It's all about radio drama.
Yeah,
I love how you mentioned that.
Well, no, it's I think Val Lewton probably knew this kind of instinctively about radio drama and why he kind of adapted that technique to his films. I'm going to be introducing next Friday, October 2nd, I'm going to be introducing 4 films on Turner Classic Movies from the book, and one of them is Cat People.
I love that movie. Oh,
that's it. And then it's going to be Dracula, Cat People, House on Haunted Hill, and The Haunting. And The Haunting kind of brings the whole thing full circle because Robert Wise was a protege of Val Lewton's, and he said he intended The Haunting as a homage to to the master Val Lewton, And so it's fun to see those. It's a quadruple bill. It's not quite a double bill, but there are films. There are some films that need to be paired, together. But both The Haunting, you never actually see a ghost, but they're there. You absolutely are convinced that they're there, and it's the one misstep with Jaws, a film I just otherwise just love, but you saw too much of the mechanical shark at the very end, and it just blew it because there was no CGI. I mean, it was state of the art for what they did, but it was not totally convincing, and I wonder if Spielberg had done it later with a little more technical possibility and potential, what he might have done with it. But yes, the thing you're anticipating, Bram Stoker knew this with Dracula. His Dracula is an offstage character for most of the book. People are talking about him, worrying about him, anticipating him. But it just makes his brief appearances, all the more effective. And that's a real gift. Not every filmmaker can pull that off. Hitchcock could do it. Val Lewton could do it. Robert Wise certainly could do it. And I think we've probably had enough of CGI. You can show anything on screen. You can create the most realistic, impossible things. You can just do it. And I think the time has come maybe to pull back a bit and use it more. I was watching Sleepy Hollow, the Tim Burton film, a few weeks ago, and it was kind of at the beginning of the CGI era, and it's used very sparsely, and you're not really aware that you're watching a special effect. You really buy the everything you're shown, and it's used almost in a painterly way. That's just it's a great film. And if there's another if there's going to be a Fright Favorites 2, Sleepy Hollow is certainly one of the films I'd like to include in it.
Before we let you go, send everybody somewhere. Sell us something. Where can we go to get your book or go to see you or whatever? Where do you want to send people?
Well, you can sit at home and watch me on Turner Classic Movies on Friday night. Each Friday night in October, they're going to do a quadruple feature. And only the first Friday is going to be directly tied into my book, although some films from the book will find their way into the scheduling later. But it looks like it's going to be a fun night. I'm not doing my bookstore appearances, but I've made arrangements with the great horror emporium, Dark Delicacies in Burbank, California. And you can find them at darkdel.com, darkdel.com. And I live nearby, and I'm coming in as often as they ask me to, do personalized inscriptions for people who are out of state or just out of town who are ordering them. And they've been doing quite a brisk business. I didn't know what to expect, with book sales are actually, they've done very well during COVID. People aren't going to the movies, but apparently are going to Amazon and other online sources and getting reading material, which is always a good thing. And so please, patronize Dark Delicacies, and I will personalize an autograph for you, and maybe next year I'll be somewhere a little closer. Let's hope.
We'd love to see. I'm definitely setting my DVR, that's for sure. I had one question for you before we let you go. I asked this of all of our guests. I'm the fiendish foodie here at Monsters, Madness, and Magic. So I'd like to know, what's your go-to movie snack?
my go-to movie snack is it's popcorn. It really is. I like it plain, without not dripping with butter. But I go through way too much, and the Cineplexes nearby have been having, for the past couple of years, have had these unlimited refills, and I won't,
Do you test the
I won't
limits?
admit how much, and then they'll even let you refill a bag and take it home.
Oh,
How generous.
These the AMC theaters.
I'm jealous.
They close. I hope they will reopen and do this again sometimes. But I'm getting used to watching, streaming first run things at home, and it's kind of not every movie needs to be seen on a big screen.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I would say maybe most movies are better in a more intimate kind of thing. But
Thank you.
there are the films that require an audience. They require a size of presentation.
Mhm.
There are things you only want to see in IMAX if they're available in IMAX. But like I said, I like storytelling, no matter how it's delivered. And between covers on a DVR or a VCR or a Blu-ray machine, just keep it coming.
That's wonderful.
Well, David, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We thank you so much for coming on, and
Thank you. This is great.
our doors
Please
are
have me.
always
I'd
open
love
to
to come
you.
back again. We barely scratched the surface. You realize what a vast kind of topic.
Dude,
Horror.
yeah, you could talk horror and you talk radio drama. I do audio drama, horror, audio drama. So, I mean, we could talk for weeks on end about that. We could exhaust every hard drive and server space for podcasts just on that. You come back anytime and let's talk.
Anytime you want.
Really, let's do it again. This is
All right.
great.
We'll
Thank
stay
you.
in touch, David. Thanks so much.
Yes.
You have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Oh, yeah, that was so cool.